When I proposed this topic, I honestly thought it would be easy, because after all, I've known Stephen for nearly a quarter of a century, and I have closely watched his paintings evolve over all of those years. I was taken in by his paintings from the start. They arrested my attention simply because they are visually and viscerally, and always have been so, stunning and seductively beautiful. Candidly, I have grown to love them and to hate them, and Stephen, simultaneously. I love how well they are painted, and I hate the fact that I cannot paint as well as him. Every painter in this room can relate. That is my highest compliment. In countless conversations, studio visits, over meals, gallery and museum visits, and all-night chain-smoking cigar marathons, he has taught me so much about painting, so I thought that this would be an easy topic to speak to. I have found these paintings to be incredibly complex, layered with ideas, references, innuendo, and humor. Books have pictures, and pictures have books. A quote to Stephen from his teacher and friend, R.B. Keatai, that Stephen has repeated to me many times. But not until I started this paper did I realize the pertinence of that remark to Stephen's paintings, and how this research into his pictures has opened volumes of books. Keatai's mentorship contributed to the high level of relevance, timelessness, and mastery of Douglas's paintings. The truth in his pictures emerged from connections literal, pictorial, allegorical, and material to pictures past, and yet, like an Ivan Albright painting, can be linked to similar painting-isms, yet defy easy classification. His subjects as he reveals of himself. His work evolves serially. The truth in his new portraits is that the picture he paints and presents to us, full frontal, confrontational, enlarged scale, bare and raw, without reference to site or location specific, are portraits of Greek deities, with or without their attributes, single and alone in the canvas. In them we see ourselves, our triumphs, our failures, our virtues, and our vices. Douglas then presents us with portraits of ourselves. Portraiture, like history painting, is dependent upon subject matter of established importance. History painting depicts when important, destiny-altering moments in time change the course of history, when the human touches the divine, and the fates of nations and individuals become manifest. We see glorified depictions of Washington crossing the Delaware or Napoleon crossing the Alps. We do not see, except perhaps in a Far Side cartoon, Washington blowing his nose or Napoleon tying his boot. As history painting depends upon important events to complete the narrative of the painting, so too does portraiture depend upon the importance of the sitter to complete the narrative of the painting. Norman Bryson wrote of portraiture, quote, "The human figure is enhanced through association with whatever the cultural milieu proposes as the scale of values, whether authority, knowledge, prestige, virtue, wealth, or personal beauty. Insofar as the sitter participates in such values, the portrait is justified. It may even be justified negatively, as in those portraits that explore the failures of idealization, where the sitter is measured against those values and found voraciously wanting." Bryson's description of portraiture fits with Douglas's paintings. Douglas presents us with portraits of Greek deities, real and immediately relatable to us because they represent us. But he exceeds simply representing us as a contemporary version of Greek mythological figures, because those figures are the personification of the characteristics, virtues, and flaws that we possess. The deities in his paintings invite and allow us to associate with them within our cultural values. They allow us to observe ourselves, our traits, our flaws. They are us and not us at once. We can view them from a distance or get as close as we want to the subject. We can choose to not or to associate ourselves with the subjects painted, but his subject is us. Douglas observes and represents us to ourselves in paint, And what more important subject matter can there be in our culture today? Like Narcissus, we see our reflection in these paintings. Unlike Narcissus, we may not like what we see. His titles are supported by more than 2 millennia of human victory or folly. Hector here, the tragic Trojan, slain and humiliated by Achilles and Athena. Adephagia, the spirit of gluttony. Laisa, the spirit of rage and fury. Oisi, the spirit of woe and misery. And Koalimos, the spirit of stupidity and foolish, my personal favorite. Sophrosyne, the spirit of moderation and discretion. Those names may be dim to us today, insisting that we dust off our studies of Homer, Herodotus, and Thucydides. They are more recognizable to us in their Latinized versions of the 7 sins and virtues: pride and her counterpart, humility, avarice and charity, lust and chastity, anger and prudence, and so on. They have been depicted in the fresco cycles of Giotto to the autopsy-esque egg temperas by Paul Cadmus. While his subjects are classical, his painting roots are Victorian, a heritage that evolved from his earlier abstract paintings. Like Alfred Leslie and Philip Pearlstein before him, Douglas rejected the 70s mindset that dictated the avant-garde in painting set by Newman, Rothko, and Still, which was, per Robert Hughes, quote, the only way to high pictorial art in the near future. The ultimate source of value or quality in art had nothing to do with skill or training, but with concept alone. The real triumph was to suppress the evidence of skill, end quote. Douglas has turned the sacred picture plane and its holy flatness into a window again, making way for spatial illusion. Douglas is indebted to Thomas Eakins, as his earlier figure paintings demonstrate. Eakins was a portrait painter, as Douglas is. Eakins' portraits often portray the subject at work, where he demonstrates the subject, that is, the cultural value that he possesses. Eakins' notable paintings, his portraits of Dr. Gross and Dr. Agnew, depict the subjects at work. Both were recognized in Philadelphia as surgeons, teachers, and champions of the ideal of hard work, an ideal that Eakins shared practically and philosophically. Douglas, too, portrays his subjects in their natural environment, as depicted here with Aphrodite, the goddess of love and pleasure, Psamathe, the goddess of sandy beaches, and Amphitrite, the consort of Poseidon. In that way, both painters describe their subject in the culture they live and work in. Douglas paints the leisure of beach bathing today, while Eakins was a product of the American puritanical Victorian age, a culture of work for reward. In his essay, Other Criteria, Leo Steinberg compares the Aiken paintings of William Rush carving his allegorical figure of the Schuylkill River with the painting Pygmalion and Galatia by Joan Leon Jerome. Eakins presents a metaphor for the American 19th century work ethic, per Steinberg. The nude in Eakins' picture, there on the left, is one of the finest in American painting, but one observes that the allegory for which the model is posing is draped. Ergo, the model's nakedness is not there to be relished, but for science's sake. Nudity, we perceive, is the structure that underlies draperies. And as the sculptor chisels away at the side of the wooden knee, everything turns from the naked woman, even the third party present, a chaperone of mature years bent on her knitting. All activity, the model's patience, as well as the sculptor's craft, is redeemed by the absorption of work. Its ennobling effect overcomes the most entrenched prejudice. Eakins' William Rush is a manful attempt to silence the American objection to art and undress by assimilating both to the ethic of work. That is why everything in this picture is preoccupied, whereas in the Jerome, everything turns to the nude. That is why the upright format of Jerome's painting is scaled to her figure, while Eakins' oblong picture is scaled to the shop. Douglas also depicts our culture. We no longer live in the 19th century Victorian America, where work was the foundation for success and economic advancement. Instead, we live in a political culture that advocates people be liberated from work, that we should have the choice to not work and still receive subsidized benefits. Some of our politicians insist that Americans work too much and more than other industrialized nations, and therefore we are entitled to more leisure time. Like Akins and William Rush, Douglas reports our culture in his painting, Procession. In Procession, Douglas depicts himself as Akins depicted in his presence in both the Agnew and Gross portraits. Douglas is yoked under the weight of a cultural march he has no control over. His comical depiction of current events that drag him along recall the caricature representations of Daumier and Boilly. The figures parade toward us, threaten to absorb us into their march, led by the Pied Piper-like figure with a common Corps emblem on his shirt. The march starts, where else, on the beach, and crosses over a bike path, tramples over a soda can emblazoned with an American flag that is a literal representation of how the progressive culture of leisure proceeds by stamping out traditional American values. In his painting Berm, Douglas relies on a pun to deliver an inevitable, if not politically correct, statement. A berm is a man-made sand barrier constructed to protect beaches from destructive storms. Yet even the most secure of berms cannot prevent the all-white beach from integration. There are no black people in the beaches of Nerdrum, Fishel, and Soroya. This painting depends upon its depiction of the presence of that which is always absent. A powerful, diagonally placed, frightening urban black with dreads streaking across an all-white beach. Yet there is no alarm registered by the white bathers. They are either oblivious to the intrusion or aware of the inevitability, as per Kimberly Pinder. Quote, "In this next millennium, the cultural syncretisms of European encounters with not only Africa, but Asia and Latin America will redefine and possibly extinguish European hegemony in some parts of the world where it exists. The numbers tell the future. Within a few decades, people of non-European ancestry or mixed ancestry will dominate certain populations in America and Europe." So why make paintings that are politically charged and certain to offend a progressive audience, risk acceptance, potential sales, and the associated benefits? Because that is what we do as responsible representational artists. We represent what we observe in our culture. Today's culture includes the 24-hour news cycle and reports things politic. As artists, we have a tradition of chronicling things politic and commenting on them. So why do current politics enter the aesthetic arena of postmodern painting as allegorical subject matter? That reason is best explained by Charles Krauthammer. Quote, "While science, medicine, art, poetry, architecture, chess, space, sports, number theory, and all the things hard and beautiful promise purity, elegance, and sometimes even transcendence, they are fundamentally subordinate. In the end, they must bow to the sovereignty of politics. Politics, that crooked timber of our communal lives, dominates everything because, in the end, everything, high and low, and most especially high, lives or dies by politics. You can have the most advanced and efflorescent of cultures. Get your politics wrong, however, and everything stands to be swept away. This is not ancient history. This is Germany, 1933. It is ancient history too, as there was no culture more efflorescent than that of ancient Greece, which collapsed under the weight of its own democracy. They sought to give everyone, taxpayers and non-taxpayers alike, equal voice in policy. Thus, with ancient Greece in our rearview mirror and contemporary Greece visible through our front windshield, the use of Greek archetypes as subjects makes sense. They are pertinent symbols of our culture today. Art history gives us the idealized figures of Greek and Roman sculpture, women of ideal proportions of the neoclassic. Our culture supplies us with the stereotyped, idealized men and women in mass media. Douglas uses an idealized woman as subject in his beach paintings and merges the tradition of bather paintings with the cultural icon of the pinup. In doing so, he offers two histories to visually feed upon simultaneously. Beach paintings are plentiful in contemporary painting, a tradition continued by Douglas, Nerdrup, and Fischl, brought forth by John Sloan, Sorolla, and Paul Cadmus. They are a subset of a larger genre of paintings of figures bathing outdoors. We know of several representations of Susanna and the Elders, the Toilets of Venus, or Diana the Huntress, painted by Rembrandt, Titian, Giorgione, Thomas Hart Benton. The list goes on. Pin-up girls were present in the Rococo, in the Neoclassic, in the Impressionistic, and in the Realist traditions. Courbet entices us with his paintings, and the Orientalist paintings of Gérôme's bathers and slave women smack of sexual energy. The tradition of naked or near naked women that entertain our erotic eye and mind is long-standing. Look at Grease vase painting. And was commercialized by photography in the pinup photographs of Betty Grable, Betty Page, and other starlets, images that hustled a lifestyle and products. Thomas Hess presents evidence that de Kooning used pinup girl photos as incentives for his women series. The word pinup entered the American language in the early 40s and referred to photographs that were attached to the walls of barracks, machine shops, barber shops, bars, in the cabs of trucks, and on the noses of World War II bombers. In short, pinups appeared where men congregated in the absence of women. Before de Kooning, illustrators as Gil Elvgren and Norman Saunders popularized the subject of seductively underdressed women. Saunders adds the narrative element of impending danger into his pulp covers, heightening the vulnerability of the pinup girl. The pinup was further used as subject by the pop artists Wesselman, Lichtenstein, Warhol, and Mel Ramos. Douglas places his idealized women on Venice Beach. These beach goddesses, Pandora, Siren, and Aphrodite, are universal in their pose and gesture. They remind the older in this audience of the beach movies that featured Annette Funicello and Frankie Avalon. Courbet references the gestures of neoclassic and romantic painting to suggest meaning in his painting The Bathers. Yet art historian Beatrice Farewell suggests that the gestures made by the two women have no specific meaning, that Courbet inserted the gestures to validate his picture as high art by quoting established high art. Douglas imbues his beach painting babes with gestures of overt sexual energy of pinup girls gone wild. Not the girl that lives next door version of the calendar paintings of Elvgren, but the girl every red-blooded guy in America would like to have move in next door. The girls of Hugh Hefner and Howard Hughes. Linda Nochlin states that Courbet looked to popular imagery, the art of the people, for his inspiration, and to support her premise cites his painting, The Meeting, derived from a popular image of the Wandering Jew. Douglas also looks to popular imagery, probably the centerfold, perhaps not that one, for his beach painting inspiration. In short, doing what he continues the tradition of representing the idealized bathing women of our culture and generation. While these women are generalized, the beaches on which they bathe are site-specific. The buildings and the beach shore are specific to Venice Beach. Look at the shore behind Assen, On Guard, Overcast Imminent, Robert, and Hedoni, and his landscape of Venice Beach, which records the shorescape from Windward to Rose Streets. It is a restated, updated, and painted version of the photographs of the Pacific Coast Highway by Ed Ruscha. Those beachscapes became classical as the paintings evolved from bathers into the Greek archetypes, as in Amphitrite, where the background landscape is ruins of Greek architecture. His large head paintings emerge and eliminate shoreline and architecture. They exist in the heavy salt air salt-filled air of the Pacific Ocean, they no longer depict the beautiful faces of young ideal women. Instead, they are quite specific portraits of our characteristics, personified in Greek deities, complete with our flaws, blemishes, and bloodshot features. His new portraits, presented more as mug shots rather than icons or reliquaries to revere, reveal our souls and our human condition. These portraits are, well, quite downright ugly. Would you want Hector or Bald Sybil or Garrus staring at you at breakfast every morning? Perhaps about as much as you would want one of Nerdrum's shitting rock paintings or the huge nude women or transvestites by Ginny Seville. What is beautiful and what is ugly is relative. Umberto Eco suggests that what we perceive as beautiful is a cultural phenomenon. For example, to a Westerner, an African ritual mask may be hair-raising, and to a non-European or non-Christian, images of the scourged Christ may seem repulsive. Eco further states that ugliness is manifest in social economics. Quote, "If we extend these observations on money to power in general, we can understand certain portraits of monarchs of centuries past, devotedly immortalized by fawning painters who certainly had no intention of overemphasizing their defects, and who perhaps even did their utmost to refine their features." Art history is filled with idealized beauty, as well as the depictions of the less attractive. Look, for example, at the portrait that Van Eyck did of his wife, Margaret. Not a beautiful woman, not a subject of ecumenical, regal, official, political, or economic importance that may require refinement in her representation. The painting is simply an honest depiction of the artist's wife. Matthias Grunwald and Mel Gibson gave us brutally tortured images of Christ. Frank Auerbach and Ivan Albright give us portraits that at first glance are unappealing and are not the people we want to hang with. But upon second glance, they are beautiful in their depiction, surface, and the care in which they are painted. Douglas's archetype paintings are ugly, like Auerbach and Albright. They make us step back from them. Then they entice us to step back forward, as a Nerdrum or Saville does, to be rewarded visually with a surface rich with information of reticulation, fascination, visual and intellectual entertainment. Painting allows Douglas to examine the human condition with our relationship to nature, by citing Emerson and the Transcendentalists' core belief that we are part and parcel of the ultimate reality. He relates the interrelationship of man to nature through the relationship of figure to ground. The harsh light on the beach, with sunlight reflected off of water and sand, mitigated by humidity, makes its presence known to anyone in or near the water. As such, object and ground become one. Douglas states, "Air and form share an equality in which they both have to be registered with paint. Tangibility and intangibility fight back and forth with each other for recognition on the painted surface. What better way to discuss the spirituality I am after than to address this and give credence to the notion of making looking like touching, a synesthetic response that only painting can deliver in its unique way." End quote. The notion that looking as a means of touching is supported by Ernst van Alpen's observation of Francis Bacon. Touch becomes the master trope of perception and contaminates even its opposite, sight. Sight is now proposed as a kind of touch, an act that is afflicted upon the body as a whole. The relationship between touch and sight in painting is further considered by Richard Schiff in Paint Made Flesh. Quote, "In painting, touch and vision converge as acts of the hand extend vision into material, even physical embodiment. Let me propose that the painter's touch converts flesh, despite its thickness and opacity, into the medium of vision." End quote. If we can touch with our eyes, then we can also touch and examine with our minds through memory, experience, and emotional identification. Empathetic looking involves our willing participation with the picture. It affords us the opportunity to project ourselves into the painted figure as it projects itself onto us. In keenly representational paintings, we associate on a literal level with the figures in the painting, and through personal experience, we make associations. In a more gestural and tactile work, the relationship may be more pronounced as we reconstruct the actions of the hand, eye, and mind of the painter. Mechanisms of empathy construct upon looking at the painting, and because a reservoir of connection between painter and painting, painting and viewer. Douglas wants empathetic impact with the viewer, and accomplishes that through the tactile nature of his paint. He uses the merger of touch and vision. Painting allows him to examine figure to ground, to register elements of positive and negative space as equal on the surface of the painting, to separate and unify gesture and unify form and unify figure from and with ground at once. The viscous nature of paint enables him to extend the relationship through the painting process, to paint extemporaneously by instinct and intellect, to make investigations, take chances, respond to results that present themselves on the canvas, to explore relationships from outside on the canvas, on the surface of the canvas. What better way for his paintings to conform to the individual self-reliant characteristics of transcendental harmony of man and nature, to encounter, understand, and embrace the ultimate reality. His paintings demonstrate that time on the canvas, making decisions, correcting, doing, undoing, and redoing within the painting is the truth in painting. For Douglas, time is a factor that interests me greatly as well. My paintings take a long time to do, and the weather of compositional struggle that exists on them overturns the static nature of the painted image in a way that sheds an animated quality to the image. Paintings take time, unlike photography or cinematography, which capture an instant. By focusing on this, I hope to gain another unique foothold for my medium, showing the decisions and chronology of development and leaving them there for the viewer to see lets the viewer actively participate in the ontology of the picture, not unlike the painter who did the work. That is a great strength in this kind of image, for the empathetic results of that engagement that adds to the painting's impact on the viewer. The painting process, then, is a way of seeing, thinking, and investigating an idea. A messy process, to be sure, that in the end yields a static image that records in the weather of its surface the scars of its failures and the triumphs of its successes. The plastic nature of oil paint assists in the conceptualization to the final realization of the picture. It opens doors that concept alone could never have envisioned, if the painter is willing to take such a gamble in the painting process. Francis Bacon, perhaps the archetype painter to Douglas, said in his interview with David Sylvester, "You know, in my case, all painting, and the older I get, the more it becomes so, is accident. So I foresee it in my mind. I foresee it, and yet I hardly ever carry it out as I foresee it. It transforms itself by the actual paint." To Douglas, painting is the risk that sometimes pays off, and if it doesn't, the failed attempt registers the undeniable fact that painting takes time, thought, and effort. Only painting has the inherent power to include process in and with the final statement. Sharon Orleans Lawrence writes about Douglas in her book, How the Materiality of Paint is Intrinsic to the Work of Art. Quote, "Considering himself to be a middleman between the fact of paint and the idea of painting, he writes that he listens to the paint as much as he listens to the will to control it. His goal has always been to imbue the subject with an atmosphere that transcends their objectivity and occupies a space that only painting can generate, a world where looking and touching are synonymous." End quote. Paint manipulation is part of the struggle that Douglas shares with us in each of his paintings. But there is a much deeper, more personal struggle that is embedded in his work, apparent in this painting, Territorial Apprehensiveness. The reading of this painting is not univocal. Initially, it depicts a beach bather making a sand version of Snow Angel in the sand, blonde American in blue jeans, posed upside down with her arms outstretched in the picture. She is a fallen angel crashed into the sand. As our country has been at war in the desert for over a decade and losing ground, she is us, flailing in the sand. Her smile, upon second glance, is a grimace. The painting is personal to Stephen on another, deeper level. This paper has examined his paintings of Greek deities as portraits of us, painted with the consequences of our virtues and vices. They are also self-portraits of Stephen. Like all of us, Stephen battles his own demons and vices and measures them against his virtues. Territorial apprehensiveness is a crossroads painting for him because the inverted, crashed angel forms a crucifix upside down, like the Apostle Peter, who at a crucial moment had to overcome his own doubts only to meet his own death. Stephen has long struggled with faith. He's bonded with the transcendental rationale, partly because that registered with him intellectually, partially because of his love of history and things American. But it still does not meet his expectations of the ultimate reality. Smart, creative people have a tough time with the rigors of faith. Douglas dances with the notion. I know that from our cigar-infested marathons. He recognizes his personal shortcomings and excesses and tries to exorcise them in his paintings, and in the end continues to question his earned qualifications for salvation. This painting recognizes and tries to reconcile that struggle, which, as we have seen here today, goes on.